Are you my ex-wife? Billionaire stunned to see his pregnant ex-wife working as black waitress. What if the person serving your coffee held the key to everything you'd lost? James Mitchell's hands trembled as he stared across the dimly lit diner, his heart pounding against his chest like a drum. The woman behind the counter moved with a familiar grace, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, revealing the delicate curve of her neck he'd once kissed goodnight 1,000 times. But it was the gentle swell beneath her waitress uniform that stopped his breath completely. She was pregnant. His ex-wife, the woman he'd driven away with his endless pursuit of wealth and success, was carrying someone else's child and working the night shift at a roadside diner in small-town Nebraska. 3 years had passed since their bitter divorce, since he'd chosen his business empire over their marriage. Now, as rain pelted the diner's windows and truckers laughed over their late dinner, James faced the woman he'd never stopped loving. "Where are you watching from tonight?" The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as James sat frozen in the corner booth, his expensive suit feeling completely out of place among the worn vinyl seats and chipped formica tables. He'd stopped here by chance during his drive back from closing a billion-dollar deal in Denver, seeking nothing more than black coffee and solitude. Instead, he'd found his past staring back at him through tired brown eyes that once sparkled with dreams they'd shared. Catherine hadn't noticed him yet. She moved efficiently between tables, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to survive on her own. The pregnancy made her movements more careful, one hand occasionally resting on her lower back as she navigated the narrow aisles. James remembered how she used to talk about children during their 2-year marriage, how her face would light up when she'd point out baby clothes in store windows. Back then, he'd always said, "Someday," too focused on the next merger or acquisition to make time for the family she dreamed of. The diner's regulars seemed to know her well. A weathered trucker named Pete called out, "Thanks, sweetheart," as she topped off his mug, and she responded with a genuine smile that made James's chest ache. This was the Catherine he remembered, warm, caring, making everyone around her feel valued. She tried to bring that same light to their marriage, but he'd been too blind to see it, too consumed with proving himself worthy of the Mitchell family legacy. "You gonna order something, or just sit there nursing that same cup all night?" The gruff voice belonged to the cook, a large man with graying temples who'd emerged from the kitchen. His protective stance near Catherine suggested he'd become more than just her boss. James felt a familiar surge of jealousy, the same possessiveness that had contributed to their relationship's downfall. "I'll take the meatloaf special," James managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Catherine turned at the sound, her order pad halfway to her apron pocket. For a moment, time suspended itself in the space between recognition and reality. Her face went pale, then flushed, her free hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly. The coffee pot in her other hand shook slightly, creating tiny ripples across the dark surface. James. His name escaped her lips like a prayer or a curse, he couldn't tell which. The diner's ambient noise seemed to fade, the sizzle of the grill, the murmur of conversations, the classic rock playing softly from the radio. Even Pete looked up from his pie, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Catherine stood there, 5 months pregnant and wearing a name tag that read, Kathy, looking at the man who'd once promised her the world but had given her only an empty mansion and a broken heart. James rose slowly from the booth, his legs unsteady beneath him. 3 years of building his empire, 3 years of telling himself he was better off alone, 3 years of avoiding every place that held memories of her. And here she was, carrying another man's child in a place he'd never thought to look. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent their entire marriage chasing success in boardrooms and corner offices, never imagining that true wealth might be found in a Nebraska diner at midnight. "I thought I'd never see you again." Catherine's voice carried a mixture of pain and resignation as she led him to a secluded booth near the back of the diner. Her movements were careful, deliberate, as if each step required conscious thought. James watched her slide across from him, the fluorescent light catching the gold wedding band on her finger. Not the one he'd given her, but a simple band that spoke of promises made and kept. "I was driving through, and James started, then stopped. How could he explain that he'd been running from another empty victory, another deal that felt hollow without someone to share it with? "You look good, Catherine." Pregnancy suits you. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. 5 months along, working double shifts to save for the medical bills, and you think I look good? She shook her head, but there was no real anger in her voice, just exhaustion. You always did see what you wanted to see. The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. During their marriage, he'd convinced himself that his long hours and constant travel were building their future together, while she tried desperately to tell him she needed him present, not just providing. Who's the father? The question tumbled out before he could stop it, raw and desperate. Catherine's hand moved protectively over her belly. Someone who was there when I needed him most. Someone who didn't think love was something you could schedule between conference calls. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. His name is Michael. He's a mechanic, has 2 kids from his first marriage, and he treats me like I matter. James felt his carefully constructed world crumble around him. In building his empire, he'd lost the only thing that truly mattered. Catherine, I don't. She held up her hand, stopping his words. I can't do this again, James. I can't let you back in just so you can leave when the next big opportunity comes along. This baby deserves better. I deserve better. The diner around them hummed with late-night energy, truckers coming and going, the cook calling out orders, but James felt completely isolated in his grief. He watched Catherine struggle to stand, her small frame carrying the weight of new life and old heartbreak. I made mistakes, he said quietly, his voice breaking. I thought if I could just build enough, achieve enough, I'd be worthy of you. I never realized I was losing you in the process. For a moment, her resolve wavered. He saw a flicker of the woman who'd once believed in their future, who'd waited up countless nights for him to come home from the office. But then her hand touched her belly again, and her expression hardened with protective determination. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. I have to get back to work, she whispered, moving away from the table with the same grace that had captivated him years ago. But now it felt like watching her walk away forever. James sat alone in the booth, surrounded by the sounds of ordinary people living ordinary lives, realizing that in his quest to become extraordinary, he'd forgotten how to be human. The cook appeared at his table with a meatloaf special, but James could only stare at Catherine as she resumed her duties, serving coffee and kindness to strangers while carrying another man's child. James pushed the untouched plate away, his appetite lost to the weight of regret pressing against his chest. He watched Catherine move between tables, her pregnant form graceful despite the obvious fatigue in her shoulders. Each smile she gave to customers felt like a knife turning in his heart. That warmth had once been his, and he'd thrown it away for stock options and merger agreements. She's special, that one. Pete, the trucker, had moved to the counter stool nearest James's booth. His weathered face carried the wisdom of too many miles and too many goodbyes. Been coming through here for 6 months now, ever since she started working nights. Never seen anyone treat folks with such genuine kindness. James nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He remembered their last fight, 3 years ago in their marble-floored mansion. Catherine had begged him to skip just one business trip to attend her sister's wedding with her. He'd cited a crucial client meeting in Tokyo, promises of making it up to her later. She'd stood in their doorway with tears streaming down her face, telling him she felt like a stranger in her own marriage. She mentioned she was married before, Pete continued, unaware he was talking to the ex-husband in question. Said her first husband loved his work more than he loved her. Can't imagine being fool enough to let a woman like that slip away. The words hit James like a physical blow. He'd spent 3 years convincing himself that Catherine had been unreasonable, that she'd failed to understand his ambitions. But sitting in this diner, watching her navigate her new life with quiet dignity, he finally saw the truth. She hadn't asked him to give up his dreams, she'd simply asked him to include her in them. Catherine returned to refill his coffee, her movements careful and professional. Will there be anything else? Her voice was steady, but he caught the slight tremor in her hands. I started therapy, he said suddenly, desperately. After the divorce. Dr. Williams helped me understand things about myself, About us. Catherine's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. I learned that I was trying to earn love instead of just receiving it. My father never thought I was good enough, so I spent my whole life trying to prove him wrong. But I proved you wrong instead. Tears threatened to spill from her eyes as she set down the coffee pot. James, please don't do this. I'm happy now. Michael loves me, and this baby. She touched her belly protectively. We're building something real together. I know, he whispered, and meant it. I can see it in your eyes. You're glowing with happiness, and it breaks my heart because I remember when you used to look at me that way. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back. This is my therapist's number. And this, he flipped it over, is my personal cell. I'm not asking for a second chance, Catherine. I just want you to know that losing you taught me how to love properly. I hope someday I get the chance to use those lessons. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. Catherine took the card with shaking fingers, their hands brushing for just a moment. The connection was electric, familiar, and terrifying. As she pulled away, James saw his own pain reflected in her eyes. The diner clock struck 2 a.m. as the last of the late-night truckers paid their bills and headed back to the highway. Catherine moved slowly, cleaning tables and counting tips with mechanical precision, but James could see the emotional weight of their encounter in every gesture. The cook, who'd introduced himself as Frank, kept a protective eye on her while preparing for the morning shift changeover. Kathy, why don't you head home early tonight? Frank suggested, his gruff voice gentle with concern. That baby needs its mama to rest. Catherine nodded gratefully, untying her apron with exhausted hands. James stood from his booth, knowing this might be his last chance to say what needed to be said. As she gathered her purse and coat, he approached the register where she was finishing her paperwork. Before you go, he said softly, there's something you need to know. She looked up, wariness and curiosity battling in her tired eyes. James, I can't handle any more surprises tonight. After our divorce, I kept a photo of us on my desk, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. The one from our weekend in Napa, where you're laughing at something silly, I said. Every time I closed a deal or made another million, I'd look at that picture and wonder why it all felt so empty. He paused, gathering courage for what came next. Last month, I finally put the photo away. Not because I stopped loving you, but because I realized I needed to let you go to be truly happy. Catherine's eyes filled with tears she could no longer hold back. James. I'm not trying to win you back, he continued urgently. I can see that Michael makes you happy in ways I never could. I just needed you to know that you changed me, even after we ended. You taught me that love isn't something you earn through achievement, it's something you nurture through presence. Frank cleared his throat discreetly from behind the counter, but his expression had softened from protective suspicion to something approaching respect. Catherine wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her other arm wrapped around her pregnant belly. I used to hate you, she whispered, the words cutting through the quiet diner like confession. I hated how you made me feel like I wasn't enough, like our marriage was just another item on your to-do list. But sitting here tonight, seeing the pain in your eyes, I think maybe we were just two broken people who didn't know how to love each other properly. James felt something shift inside his chest, not hope for reconciliation, but something deeper. Forgiveness, perhaps, or simply the peaceful acceptance of truth. You weren't broken, Catherine. You were perfect. I was just too focused on becoming someone I thought you'd want instead of being someone you could love. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Catherine reached across the space between them and touched his hand briefly. I forgive you, James. And I hope you can forgive me too, for not fighting harder for us. As she gathered her things to leave, James felt the first real peace he'd experienced in 3 years. Sometimes love meant holding on, but sometimes it meant learning to let go with grace. 6 months later, James received a text message that changed everything. It was a photo of a tiny, wrinkled baby wrapped in a soft pink blanket, with a simple message, Sophia Catherine Harrison. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. She's perfect. His hands trembled as he stared at the screen, realizing Catherine had given her daughter her own middle name, a name that would always connect them, even across the distance of separate lives. He was in his office, the same corner suite where he'd once prioritized deals over dinner with his wife, but everything had changed. The walls now held photos of the community center he'd funded in Catherine's honor, the scholarship program for single mothers he'd established, and the family he'd finally learned to prioritize, his sister and her children, whom he'd reconnected with after years of emotional distance. Dr. Williams had helped him understand that healing meant more than just recognizing his mistakes. It meant using those lessons to become the man Catherine had always believed he could be. James had simplified his business, focusing on companies that strengthened communities rather than just generated profit. He'd learned to leave the office at reasonable hours, to answer personal calls during business meetings, to measure success in relationships rather than revenue. 3 days after receiving the photo, James made a decision that surprised even himself. He drove the same route to Nebraska, but this time he stopped at a florist first. The arrangement he chose was simple and beautiful, white roses with baby's breath, nothing extravagant or attention-seeking. The card read, "For Sophia and her amazing mother. Wishing you a lifetime of joy. With love and gratitude, James." He left the flowers at the diner's counter with Frank, who'd become something of a protector for Catherine's small family. Frank's gruff exterior had warmed considerably since that night 6 months ago, and he promised to deliver the arrangement personally. "She's doing real good," Frank told him, pride evident in his voice. "Michael's a good man, treats her right. The baby's healthy and happy, and Catherine's glowing like a new mama should." James nodded, feeling a bittersweet peace settle over him. "Thank you for taking care of her when I couldn't." Driving home, James thought about the photo on his desk, not the old one of him and Catherine, but a new one of his nephew's little league team, which he now coached every Saturday. He'd learned that love wasn't about possession or even romance, it was about wanting someone's happiness more than your own comfort. Catherine had taught him the difference between being successful and being significant. Success was about what you accomplished. Significance was about who you became in the process. He'd spent their marriage chasing success, but losing her had forced him to discover significance. As the Nebraska highway stretched before him, James smiled for the first time in months. Somewhere behind him, a baby named Sophia was beginning her own story of love and discovery. And somehow, in letting Catherine go completely, he'd finally learned how to love properly. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales like this one. Thank you for joining us on this journey of redemption and second chances.